In the pantheon of wine education, one university continually ranks among the top in the world, UC Davis. Tonight, we are joined by Professor Hildegarde Heymann, and she is going to walk us through sensory evaluation. After all, she's only been teaching at the university wine-related curriculum for 20 years. Join us tonight, SIP episode 132, as we have UC Davis. If it's Friday, it must be SIP. I couldn't be more excited. And I even said that earlier today, how much I was looking forward to tonight's episode for two reasons. One, the guest that we have this evening is going to make everyone smarter, and we're going to have a good time doing it because we're going to be evaluating wine. But equally importantly, we're going to be learning about the giant producer of some of the highest caliber wine professionals in the world, UC Davis. So Alyssa, I see you, Chris D, Eileen, Eve, Ivy, Jan, Jeff and Jane are in the house, and they are going to be smarter, which is hard to do because they've only missed about 6 of the SIP episodes. And this is episode 132, wine lovers. So congratulations to all of you that have participated in most of those. Jenny J, Jim B is in the house, and I'm guessing Jim B is not alone. There's probably 6 to 8 people sitting around. Larry, Lauren, Lori P, Lynn, Michael, everyone, welcome. Tonight, we are going to be digging deep into sensory evaluation of wine and also into UC Davis. My name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar, your direct-to-consumer wine company. We specialize in Napa and Sonoma wines. So these are nearly always limited production wineries. And by limited production, we mean producers easily under 5,000 cases. Many producers are under 1,000. The Chardonnay that is in many people's glass this evening, she only made 45 cases. So 45 cases of wine is not a large production. And some of you may be wondering, how on earth do people have the wine in the glass? And I will tell you how. They navigated over to the Cellar Angels website. And on the Cellar Angels website, you will be greeted by just an absolute drop dead gorgeous immersion into all things Napa and Sonoma, where you're literally in the vineyard. But when you go to the shop page and you hit wine, it's going to bring you to some of the current marketplace offerings. And the first item you will always see is the SIP kit. So SIP stands for Shelter in Place, or did at one point in time, but the SIP educational series that we're having each Friday night features a rotating selection of wines that come in and out of the kit. And they're the next, as you can see, there's 4 wines here. So for the next 4 Fridays, these will be the wines. You get to sit down, relax at home, at the office, wherever, on the lanai, in the boat. We have several people that actually log in from their boat, outdoor on the patio, and drink along and ask the winemaker or producer or winery owner questions. This is a great opportunity to get up close and personal with the winemaker and some of the best wines coming out of Napa and Sonoma right now. So definitely purchase the kit because these wines will go fast. The kits go fast. And tonight we're going to be talking about Elaine Wines 2017 Chardonnay from the Calipte Vineyard. It's an estate vineyard at Elaine's house. But this is really how you get the best wines delivered and can hop on the comfort of your own home and learn from the people that actually made the wine. So I was talking earlier with tonight's guests, and I think those of you that have been around long enough to understand Napa and Sonoma, understand kind of the topography, the AVAs, the microclimates. And when you start digging deeper into the winemakers, it has to be something like 8 out of 9 out of 10 times the winemaker matriculated through UC Davis. They may have come from the Midwest, or they came from a different country, or what have you. But if they have a wine pursuing dream, they go to UC Davis, and it's just a powerhouse. I mean, if this was a football team, it would be Alabama, LSU, and a couple others, and Georgia combined into one. Always at the top, always worldwide rankings for agriculture, just really a special institution. So we were introduced by Elaine Sale to tonight's guests, Dr. Hildegarde Heymann. And Dr. Heymann has been teaching students at UC Davis for, I think, darn near 20 years. We're going to get into it. As a matter of fact, let's get into it right now because there's a lot of ground to cover. So I would like to introduce you and raise a glass to tonight's guest of honor, Dr. Hildegarde Heymann from UC Davis, actually in her office at UC Davis. Cheers.
Hi.
First, let me get the nationality out of the way. What is your nationality?
I have been an American citizen since 1996, but prior the previous 40 years, I was a South African citizen.
South African citizen. Okay. And I want to, you've been at Davis for how long? Was my math close? 20
This
years?
time I've been at Davis 20 years, but I'm a homing pigeon when it comes to Davis. I came the first time in 79, the second time in 81, and the third time in 2003.
They just can't keep you away, it sounds like.
Apparently not.
I like it. We speak fondly, really with a warm spot in our heart for the winemakers that come out of UC Davis, and the folks at Elaine Sale, I know, took the online course. Lise Asamont, big fan of yours, big fan of the institution. A lot of the Cellar Angels winemakers that we know personally, everyone reveres the institution. I would love you to kind of start at South Africa and walk us through, what was your wine epiphany, if there was one, and then how that all came about and when you decided to, okay, I think I need to start doing this a little bit more seriously.
Okay, so I was 17 years old when I graduated from high school. And so my father had to sign my college applications. And I wanted to be an engineer. In the 70s in South Africa, he did not want his daughter to be an engineer. There was a huge family fallout. But anyway, long story short, I decided that I would become a winemaker.
At 17?
At 17. I'd never had wine, didn't grow up in the wine area. I grew up in Pretoria, the wine area is in the south. And so my father said, okay, I'll sign this one, but I don't think they take women. So I wrote a letter to the registrar who said, yeah, we do, but we've never done one. And I don't really know why you want to do this. So anyway, naive me went down to Stellenbosch University, where I was the first woman who graduated with a degree in enology and viticulture. And there were interesting experiences during that time because first woman makes things interesting.
I would imagine.
So when I graduated, nobody wanted to hire me. I had 17 interviews, and 17 times I was told, you're perfect for this job, but you're a woman and we're not going to hire you. So the long story short is I ended up working for a research institution for a number of years, making small scale wine for their research program. And it was interesting, but boring.
Had those 17 individuals or organizations that turned you down, had they not heard of Lily Bollinger? Had they not heard of Madame Clicquot or anything like that?
This is South Africa in 1977. I can't speak to these things.
Okay.
There were other issues too.
Yes,
anyway,
exactly.
So after 2 vintages of making research wine, I was bored and I really wanted to be a winemaker. So I, in retrospect, very naively thought if I got a master's degree, that may open some doors. So I was lucky enough to get accepted to Davis. And I arrived at Davis as a 22-year-old, having never been out of the country, and ended up doing a master's degree under Roger Bolton, who retired a few years ago, revered UC Davis viticulture and enology professor. And so my life was good. I had taken all my classes, I was getting my research done. And then in the December vacation of 1979-80, my roommate, who was a master's student of food science, kept telling me I needed to take this sensory science class that she had to take for her degree, which I didn't need for my degree.
Right.
And she didn't take it the year before because she had taken a quarter off and gone skiing. So all of her cohort had done this class and she had been told you needed a friend in this class and all this stuff. Long story short, after probably 4 weeks of Laura nagging, I said, okay, I'll do it, but you do the dishes for 10 weeks. She agreed to that. So I walked into Rosemary Pangborn's sensory science class in January of 1980. Not really wanting to be there, not really wanting to take this class, really just wanting to get the dishes done. And in the 5th week of that semester quarter, I was sitting in class and I looked at her and I went, that is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Who does this at 23?
And the next word out of my mouth was, oh, hell. because there was no path. I was supposed to go back to South Africa. I was supposed to go get a job. It was very, very stressful. But anyway, so I finished, went back to South Africa and moved heaven and earth and a few other pieces, but did get back in the fall of 81
Okay.
to do a degree in agricultural chemistry, but with sensory really as the driving force. And so I did that. And then in 86, there were not a lot of jobs out, but there was a job in Missouri in food science, not on wine, on ice cream and extruded products and meat. And so I moved to Missouri, and
I'm not certain you could get farther away from wine than extruded products, ice cream, and meat.
Correct, but it was fun. It was a new place, and it was interesting and exciting. And I really enjoyed Missouri. I loved the university. I loved the students. As a woman who grew up in Africa and never seen snow, and also grew up in a part of Africa that doesn't have humidity, the weather was an entirely different conversation. And I pretty much complained for 16 and a half years about the weather. And
they get snow and a lot of humidity, so a little moisture there. Absolutely.
Exactly. And then in 2002, my PhD advisor, Ann Noble, retired from UC Davis. And I got a phone call from the then chair, and he said, would you be interested in coming back? And I said, well, I haven't applied to a job. And he said, well, we have this thing called Target of Excellence, which means that we go to the provost and we tell the provost, if we had a position, and if this person applies, we will hire them. So let's just cut through the chase. Wow. And I arrived here in January of 2003, and I'm still here.
That is incredible. Just all aspects of it. First, at 17 years of age, to determine that this is the industry that you want to be in, having never had wine. So that's amazing to me from an insight standpoint. I don't even know where that bug bit you or where that seed was planted.
The thing that was fascinating to me about the wine degree was that I didn't have to specialize. I could do some botany, I could do some plant stuff, I could do microbiology, I could do chemistry, I could do math. It was just a very wide degree, and it sounded fascinating. I've never really liked being put into a box, and this allowed me to not be in a box and make it expand. Sure. And then, as it turns out, I actually really loved the product once I got into the product. So it was serendipitously the right decision to make. And then the next one was, in many ways, the first decision got me to the next decision.
Right.
And I've been so lucky that I've got to do exactly what I wanted to do on that February morning in 1980.
Well, I also think it's incredible what I don't use the term trailblazer lightly. I mean, you have opened up a bunch of doors for a lot of women behind you from that first class where you're the first female to graduate from the program. And
yeah, my brother actually went to a party a few years after I graduated and met some girl. He really thought she was nice. And he said something to this girl, and she said to him, oh, what's your last name? And he said to her, and she said to him, is your sister Hildegarde? And he said, yeah, why? He said, well, I am a B&E student because of your sister. He said, at that moment, he decided, okay, this is not for me.
That's amazing. And I think there's probably a lot more people like that you don't know about, because that's incredible. Really, really something special. And I applaud your courage just to go into not only the field, but then at a young age to leave South Africa, come to California. There's people that get to the age of 30 and haven't even left their home state. And I think it's a sin, unfortunately, but your bravery and courage to go out and pursue this dream is certainly to be commended. So I hope you look back fondly on those decisions.
Yeah, I do. I don't regret anything.
You mentioned the word sensory a couple of times, and with good reason. Give me a loose definition of what we are talking about when we talk about sensory evaluation as it relates to wine.
Okay, so sensory evaluation can be used for anything. It's actually used for personal care products. If you have babies with diapers, those have seen sensory scientists. If you have a Porsche, that's seen a sensory scientist. There are two forms. Basically, in sensory science, we use humans as our measuring device. to tell us about things. And so there are two types. The subjective version of that is consumer sensory science, where we ask people how much they like something, or do you like this one better than that one? The problem is the consumers are very good about telling us what they like and dislike, but they're very, very bad about telling us why.
Exactly.
So for that reason, there's another set, which is called analytical sensory science, which we try to make as objective as possible, keeping in mind that we're dealing with the human brain and all the rest of it. In analytical sensory, we use trained judges, and we are interested in how the product is. So in the case of wine, how red is it? How much oak does it have? How astringent is it? How acid it is? And they use scales to give us that information. We train them using reference standards, so we all speak the same language. And then, so essentially for each project, we create a little world for the words that we would use. And then they get to do these wines usually in triplicate, blind. They have no idea how many they have. And then they take, if you have 9 wines, probably the training and the data collection may take 4 or 5 weeks. If you have 54 wines, as we have had, it may take 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And come once a day for an hour. And then we can take that data. Now we have all the wines, we have multiple, we usually have somewhere between 10 and 15 panelists. So let's say we have 10, so we have 30 observations for each wine. So we can now really start seeing what is really happening, because all the noise kind of gets smoothed out in this process. And then we use a lot of statistics.
Hold that. Oh, good. Statistics, my favorite.
Literally mine.
Oh my goodness. I'm in pain right now just hearing the word statistics. Let me pause there for a second. Hans and Caitlin are probably loving the engineering aspect of this, but I do want to, I forgot to give the answer to the poll question. So when assessing color in wine, this, by the way, if you aren't signed up for the Cellar Angels email that comes out once or twice a week, you should sign up for that. Every Monday we have a poll question, and the winner gets to receive some loyalty points in their Cellar Angels account. When assessing color in wine, clear rim in a red wine typically indicates the wine is young. Just teasing. The wine is mature in a clear rim. And I'm going to show you a picture because Scotland, I can't say his last name, but there's only one Scotland, really. Does anybody know more than one Scotland? Fresh back from a world tour with he and Lily. But here's an example of what we're talking about. Younger wines have more vibrant, concentrated color at the rim. Older wines, the color tends to fall out, and it's a little bit more clear and translucent, and you will almost always see this turn more of a brickish orange or brickish red, designating some age on this wine. So you can argue all you want amongst yourselves. Mission can, by the way, the answers came in 50-50. There was, I think, 24 responses, and it was 12-12. You can blame Mission Control. It was her question. And I'm sorry, it was Ivy's question. You can blame Ivy. But that is, Scotland was the winner. Jim B, you were second. Brent H, who is not on, was third. So it's funny because you just talked about having 30 plus or 30 different data points from 10 or so panelists. And I love the analytical and I love the objective piece, because this is something that I have argued for 20 plus years in wine as it relates to ratings. So ratings drive me up a wall. I understand from a marketing perspective, good. From a marketing perspective, why they're needed to a degree. But, you know, when Wine Spectator comes out and says, these are our top rated wines, and one of them is, and there's 5 that are 98 points. There might be a $40 wine that's 98. There might be a $1,500 bottle of wine that's 98. And someone's trying to figure out, well, which one of these is better? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. Their taste could be completely different than your taste. So is that some of the core issues or biases or things that you get to explain and teach people how to more appropriately assess?
It's for us, we never ask our trained panels whether they like something or not. It's irrelevant to the process. What we get at the end is we can then use the data that we get and give you information about it. So we just did a study that my master's student talked about yesterday at the American Society of Enology and Viticulture meetings, in which we were interested to see whether Petit Syrah, Jarif, differed by price point. So we had 7 of them below 20, 7 between 20 and 40, and 7 above 40. And so we went through the training process, and it turns out that they're all very, very similar. They're not hugely different from each other. What was different is we had 3 wines in the set of 21 that were hugely flawed. We had one wine that literally, to make a reference, so we make reference standards for our words. So if you say Cellar doesn't have this, but let's say you've got a cab and you want a bell pepper, we actually get bell pepper, soak it in wine, and then you have a bell pepper standard. And in this particular case, this wine had such a Brettanomyces flaw that the panelists kept telling her they wanted barnyard as a standard. And so she literally went to the cow barn, got some cow manure, put it in a glass, and handed it to them. And they said, yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Really?
Yeah, it was the worst one I've ever had. And it was really interesting. So yeah, so it turns out that price is not a huge definer of the sensory attributes of Petit Syrah in California. Right. They're very similar. Now, clearly, you can also, they're from different AVAs and stuff, so people buy things on for other reasons. But from a sensory perspective, blind, they are very, very similar.
Now, when you have these 8, or would you say 9 wines, or how many different wines in this panel of 10?
So this time there were 21 wines.
21 wines.
There were 21 wines. They did them in triplicates. We trained for about a month, and then they tasted 6 wines a day until we got through all 21 of them.
And so everyone is using the same objective and analytical scales.
Correct. They're using the exact same scales. They also use the same, because they've now been taught. An example, there's 2 examples. One is early on in my career, I trained a panel on Cabernet, and the way you do it, you do 2 wines at a time. But anyway, I had 13 panelists, one of whom was a famous winemaker. And 12 of my panelists said this wine smelled like blackberries. The winemaker said it smelled like violets. Now, what you do is you go back, and then the next day you bring them glasses of these things that they told you. So I came back with frozen blackberries and blackberry syrup and fresh blackberries and blackberry jam, and so a whole series of blackberry things. And usually you ignore the ones because they're usually outliers, but it's my first panel, and this guy was really famous. So I had violet candy, I had violet soap, I had some violet perfume, and on my ride back into school that morning, there were violets by the mailbox on the chancellor's lawn, and so I stole some violets.
Borrowed, I'm sure.
Well, they were dead by the time I was done. And anyway, so I started with him, and I started with the non-violet, the non-flowers in black glasses, so you can't see what it is. And no. And I finally handed him the violet flowers. And he said, no, these are not violets. And yeah, they're violets.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little distressed at this point, but anyway, so we move on to the rest of the group and start looking at blackberry stuff. And he sticks his nose in a glass that has a defrosted blackberry in it. And he looks at me and said, those are violets.
Oh.
And so he was experiencing exactly the same thing, but he was using a different word. And unless you train them, you don't know that. The other thing that frequently happens is we get the word woody. And we now know when we get the word woody, it can go one of 2 directions. It's either oak, or it's mushroom, forest, floor, earthy. And those are very different things, and they come from very different situations in wine. But if you didn't train them to separate those, then half would tell you it's woody, and the other half would tell you and you wouldn't know anything. So our reference standards are a way to make sure that everybody is speaking the same language.
And the students in your classes, you just mentioned, you're a pretty world famous winemaker. What is kind of the average student? Do they and by that I mean, do they come into your class pretty much geared towards a wine curriculum?
Yes, okay. I see our students the last quarter of their senior year and the last quarter of their master's year. So by that point, they've done, so they are pretty much geared towards the sensory, towards a wine. Now, most of them will never do any sensory science in the way that we do it in my lab, but they will be buying stuff where somebody else did the sensory science. And they should be able to ask questions about how well it was done. because there's a lot of bad science out there, and they should be able to read articles and say, well, this person did this to the wine, and this is what they say the outcome is. How well was that done? What was the true outcome?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was skimming an article today, as a matter of fact, talking about the attributes of Sauvignon Blanc's citrus aroma can be traced back to picking methods and leaf pulling in the vineyard, and also obviously strains of yeast that get used in the fermentation process. And it's all fascinating from a science perspective. When they get done with this 10-week study that you just talked about with regards to the 21 wines, do you ever pull the bags off of the wines and reveal the producers?
Yeah, we usually at the end will show them what they had. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and some of them will be interested, and some of them will just like, no, I've done this, I'm done, moving on. But yeah, we will show them what they had.
Does anybody like the Petit Syrah that tastes like manure in a glass? Were people surprised at that label, or they're like, nope, I expected that out of that label?
No, we were actually surprised at that label, to be really honest. And I was going to say my standard operating procedure is, if people donate one or more wines out of a group for me, then I code them. If I buy the wines, then I bought them off the shelf. In this case, I'm from K&L. Then I don't. But I looked at this and I was like, we are going to code these. So for publication, we'll code them.
Okay.
Because I don't really need somebody, but I will talk to the winemaker separately.
Literally, I was just going to ask that. Do you ever follow up and go?
Sometimes I do. It depends. It depends on the winemaker. It depends on the relationship. There's all kinds of. There are some winemakers that would take this positively, and there are some winemakers that.
On the other hand, because we don't want to just be downers, do you ever get a wine that is so brilliantly assessed by the team or by the students, and everybody is in lockstep with raving about this wine, analytically, observationally? Do you ever call that winemaker and say, hey, FYI?
Yeah, we've done that too. We did study years ago where we were looking at whether you could predict quality from the sensory attributes of the wines. And so we looked at wines from the California State Fair. And it turns out that it's really difficult. You can predict non-quality, but the problem is once you get to quality, you're getting into balance. And so it's not really easy to separate out things. But we had a wine in that group that had not done very well at the fair, but my consumers who tasted this wine. So we did both an analytical study and a hedonic study, and the consumers loved this wine. And so I did call, and I happened to know who the winemaker was. So I called the winemaker and said, yeah, you didn't really do really well at the fair, but you could sell this.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Mike, I'm wondering if people look down on their phone when it's ringing and they're like, oh no, it's Hildegarde. This can't be good. This can't be good.
No, I don't think so.
That's fantastic. And I like that you do call it both good and bad. So that's great from that standpoint. And the sensory evaluation piece, I think is amazing, because not only do I frown upon points, but I do think so much of an individual's assessment of wine is individual. It's unique to them. And
yeah, I mean, that's why we use groups of people, because as we sit here, we see things differently. I'm not talking about being colorblind. I'm talking about people who have perfectly good vision. We don't see colors the same way. We don't smell smells the same way. We don't taste the same way. We don't feel the same way. We are as different in the way our senses work. Never mind what happens in our brains, because there's expectations and experience and all the rest. I'm just talking about what happens here. We're as different with that as we are visually. So we sort of go through life thinking, yeah, people look different, but they all work the same way. They don't.
Oh, so that's interesting. And I find it fascinating that even people that aren't colorblind, so that they will pass the same vision test and have the same ability to detect colors, see wine as different colors.
Will see colors differently, correct. They will, depending on which amino acid is at which position in that receptor, is going to change how much of the wavelength you're going to need to see the color. And we have about, at this, they found the first two of these about 15 years ago. Now we know there's about 40 of them, we think. So every one of us have multiple variations on this. And so we just see the world differently. We smell the world differently. Some of us are what they call specifically anosmic to an odor, which means you can't smell it. Other people can smell it, but you can't. And some of us are extra sensitive to certain odors. Probably the most easy one is asparagus pea. I seem to be on an excretion thing here. For many years, we thought that some people, when they ate asparagus, would metabolize the asparagus in such a way that their urine reeks of asparagus pea, and that other people metabolize it somewhat differently, and they don't. Well, it turns out we all metabolize asparagus exactly the same way. We all make a pea that smells, but some of us can't smell it.
If you just joined us, it's Urine Talk with Cellar Angels this evening. Actually, it is absolutely hysterical that you brought up asparagus pea, because it is a running joke in this household about how fast that metabolizes, and it's not hours, it's minutes.
And there are people who cannot smell that at all.
I'm so jealous of that.
Yeah, and so that's just one example. I mean, in my case, I am extremely agnostic to TCA, trichloroanisole. I will eventually smell it, but by the time I smell it, everybody else is running screaming from the room. But I'm really, really sensitive to ethyl acetate, which is nail.
And what's that one?
Nail polish remover. It comes from acetic acid binding to alcohol. And so I always, when I stick my nose in the glass and go, oh my gosh, I always have to look around and go, okay, nobody else seems to smell this. I need to
Interesting. That's fascinating. Speaking of sensory evaluation, I'm going to launch our first poll question. So everybody needs to get their buzzers ready. And so, oopsie, okay. What was the first sensory evaluation of wine exam or course conducted? What year? Your answers are either 1971, 1977, 1983, or 1997. I'm calling them out for anybody listening on Sirius satellite radio to the broadcast. I'm not certain why I'm calling them out. So I'm going to give this a lot of changes in votes. And for those of you that are new, you should have received an entry fee for the poll questions. We just roll that over. It's a gambling fee because gambling is now legal in all 50 states and basically in every football game on Sunday. So we wanted to introduce it here for the wine assessment portion. So I'm going to give this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So now the answers here actually had some corresponding famous wine events. 1977, obviously, I chose that year because it's the year after the Judgment of Paris. 1983, I chose that year because allegedly 1982 is the greatest year in Bordeaux history ever. But the answer is the first century evaluation of wine, formal wine course conducted was 1971. Now, they used—
I disagree, but that's okay.
Okay, well, only if you knew something about sensory evaluation would I take that into consideration.
Maybe I do.
No, we're going to get into that in a second, because the interesting thing that you and I talked about in the preparation is that they used a schema called the DLG-20, which is actually from Davis. So when you are doing these assessments that you talked about, and the analytical side of things and the different analysis and the statistics, do you throw out the top grades, throw out the bottom grades? There's got to be all sorts of different formats.
We keep everything. We usually use line scales, so scale with not too much, and then they mark where they want to be. Let me talk a little bit about the Davis 20-point scale. It's a scale that was created in the 1930s after Prohibition by Russler and Amarine at Davis, because they were trying to improve the wine quality after Prohibition. I mean, things were catastrophic. And so they needed a way of evaluating all these wines, because they were making thousands of small scale wines every year from all over the state to try. And so they came up first with 3 100-point score sheets. And then they realized after the first year that they only really needed 1 20-point score sheet. But this score sheet was created to look at faults, because at the time, most wines were turbid, most wines were oxidized, Most wines had all kinds of horrendous microbial flaws. Most, I mean, they were, and so the way the scale worked is that if you were 13 and above, you were from average to great. Any below 13, you were in the weeds. If you use that scale today with today's wines, you would be hard pushed to get a wine that's less than 17.
I believe it.
So the scale means nothing. It is a scale,
Right.
it's a testing device that was created for a problem, and it so much solved the problem that the scale itself is gone. It is just useless.
Good, as well it should be. And by the way, as you heard, Hildegarde mentioned that she has been at Davis in this stint for 20 years. And during that time, throughout the curriculum that you have taught, how many students have come before you to receive some sort of either sensory or evaluation or wine production, any type of wine?
So I've taught Introduction to Winemaking once a quarter for about 14 years. Once a year for 14 years. That's about 500 students a shot. I have taught sensory evaluation of wine, both the lab and the class, for 21 years, 21 times. That's about 50 on average per year. I've taught winemaking for 6 years, and that's also about 50 on average. And I've taught sensometrics, which is a stats class, for 20 years, and that's probably about 10 a year. And then I've taught in the certificate program, which is an online asynchronous program. I don't do that anymore, but I did do that for about 17 years. And those were about 100 to 200 a year. So if you all add all this up, we're probably somewhere in the 7,000 to 8,000, I think, numbers.
That's
so quite a few.
Nearly 8,000.
I've taught a lot of kids.
Yeah, that's, and I think it's impressive beyond adjectives and superlatives that I can produce, because it's just, first of all, I think teachers are one of the most unsung but most important jobs in the world. And it is, and you having influenced and had a major part in 8,000 individuals' lives as it relates to their passion for wine is really something special. As it relates to UC Davis, why is UC Davis such an incredible feeder system and powerhouse in wine education?
Well, we started doing this in 1880. This department is the only department in the UC system on 10 campuses that exists because the state assembly made us exist. So in 1880, the dean of the college in Berkeley, that was the only UC at the time, said that we needed to improve wine in California. His name was Eugene Hildegarde, and he convinced the legislature to do so, and they created a department in Berkeley. And then in 1904, when they started the university farm here, because you can't grow grapes in Berkeley, you can't grow a lot of things in Berkeley, it's too cold. So they moved most of the farming operations up here in 1904, and then this became a real full-blown separate university in the 1950s. So they moved viticulture and enology up here. Then the prohibition hit, and they stopped working on wine, but they continued to work on viticulture. And then in the 33, when prohibition, they hired a bunch of enologists and they started working again. So we've been doing this for a very long time. Also, the UC system is arguably probably the best public university system in the United States. And so and we have very strong support. We still have strong support from the legislature. There was a dean a few deans ago who wanted to remove the department. And he was basically told by the legislature, no, they exist because we want them to exist, and we still want them to exist. So we have the resolution in the chair's office. And so I think we started early, we did good work, and we've just been building on that.
And I mean, the number of great wine names that donate back to the university, that actually, Mondavi, Gallo, it just goes on and on and on and on.
My sensory lab is called the J. Lure Sensory Facility. And because Jerry Lure gave me a huge amount of money to hire postdocs, because he thought that that would be a good use of moving things forward. And probably 54 of my publications in the last 20 years would not have existed if it hadn't been for that money. People have been incredibly good. We sit in a building complex that's probably about $120 million. And the Mondavis gave about, I think, 35 of that. And then everybody else is, I mean, there's just names everywhere.
It's incredible. It's such an amazing place. I am now going to ask you we're going to apply everyone who's drinking the Elaine Sale 2017 Chardonnay. Well, first we're going to show a video, and I would like everyone to, I'll stop talking, but you need to turn your volume up, because when we recorded this video, it was going to be a surprise to Hildegarde. It's less of a surprise now because we had to test it with her on camera. So she's going to act surprised. But you're going to have to turn your volume up because the video was recorded in not the best audio area, but the video was recorded in, and Doug knows this. This was recorded in Elaine Sale's house. And so that's her vineyard back there where this Chardonnay comes from. So I'll stop talking, turn your laptop or your sound up. Hello, Sipsters, and sorry Elaine can't be with you in person. And Hildegarde, this is one of your online students who is making a tremendous go of it with Elaine Wines. Elaine Sale, what are we drinking?
We are drinking my 2017 Elaine Vineyard Chardonnay. And it came from rows that you see right outside the window, about 4 of them.
And what is the vineyard named after?
The vineyard is named after, it's the scientific name for Calyptiana, the hummingbird that you will probably see here today. It frequents our flowers that lives in the oaks and madrones that surround the vineyard.
I did not think so. So, okay, flavors, aromas, and pairings. So what are we thinking about from the aroma standpoint on this?
From the aromas, I get lemon and tangerine, apple, and pear are the predominants.
I love the tartness and the acidity. It has such great acidity. And then pairings. What would you pair this with?
Any seafood. Lobster would be great. Roast chicken. Mushroom risotto.
Very versatile.
Cheeses are wonderful.
I love it. Hildegarde, she's doing wonders, and thank you for allowing us to interview one of your students.
Cheers.
Cheers. So hopefully you were able to hear that, some of it. But the important thing is that this is a student that bit by the bug early on and wanted to get, again, like we talked about, someone gets bit by the bug, they want to get formally educated, they go to Davis. We featured her wine about 5-6 months ago and had her on SIP about 2 months or so ago. And she introduced us to you, which is another example of why I love this industry with all my heart is the kindness within the industry. And you haven't actually met Elaine in person, have you?
No, I haven't. She took the certificate program a number of years ago, and that was 100% asynchronous. So it was, they got their videos, and then there were exams, and I would every week send them information. And when they asked me questions, I would answer them, but there's never been a direct face-to-face conversation. So when you first said, reached out to me, I had to go back and figure out where I had her because I knew I didn't have her in class.
Right.
Yeah, it's a wonderful industry. I was at the American Society of Enology and Viticulture meetings this week, and yesterday, as I was getting up to walk out of a lecture, at the end of it, Lisa Asselmont came up to me and said, "I hear you're doing the SIP thing tomorrow night. I had so much fun." And Lisa and I did not overlap. She actually graduated before I came back. But yeah, it's a really great community. The people you go to school with here are the people you're going to see for the rest of your life in the industry. When I went through here in '79, and many of my cohort are now retiring or selling their wineries, or their children are taking over. An example would be Dave Ramey, who is still actually active. But then I also have now 20 years of new ones who are starting to become full-blown winemakers and making wine. Win Peterson Nedry in Oregon, Yeah, they're just everywhere.
Let me ask you this, given the last 2 decades, what do you see as the biggest change of students coming in compared to when you first started teaching to the student that comes in today?
More diversity. It's been absolutely wonderful to see. When I first was here, there were very few women and lots of white guys. When I came back 20 years ago, it was probably 50-50 female, and it still is. But now we're starting to see a lot of Hispanic kids whose parents, in many cases, had been cellar workers and vineyard workers in Napa and all over the state, and their kids want to still stay in the industry, but want to do the next step sort of thing. We're doing really well on that side. We're doing really well on the Asian American side. We're not doing so great on the African American side. We've had 5 in the last 20 years, and that's way too few, but we're working on it.
Yeah, no, that last bit is tragic, but the first several items of information with the women.
And we know it works because we started working on the Hispanic side about 17 years ago, and that has definitely blossomed. So now we're working on the next one, and we've actually got a couple of things going, one of which is with Dwayne Wade, who is very passionate about this topic, and I think it's going to be okay. If we have a conversation 20 years from now, it's going to be okay.
Good. I'm very excited about that. And he's got a giant heart, Dwayne Wade,
yes.
And very compassionate with that regard. Former Chicagoan, just saying. But when people leave today, or even in the last 10 or 15 years, how do they use some of this analytical skill and statistical analysis and things that you've taught them? How do they bring that into their jobs, into their
Okay, as I said, most of them are not going to do sensory science, although every so often somebody ends up at a large enough company like Gallo or Constellation or Treasury or Jackson, where they actually do this. And so they may actually be part of that team, or they may get information from that team to manage their blending or their winery decisions, whatever the case may be. But most of them are going to be buying yeast from yeast companies or oak or widgets from various people who will try to sell it to them on the sensory outcome of this thing, whatever this thing is.
Right.
And there's a lot of smoke blowing in the world, and so they need to be able to look at the data that came out from this thing to see if it actually makes sense. You know, if I have 2 people taste something and tell you this one is much more oaky than that one is, I'm not going to spend $1 million on my oak program on that. On the other hand, if I had a full-blown, properly done sensory analysis study done on this, which some of the oak companies do, maybe I'll spend that $1 million.
Interesting. And so now you have the Elaine Sale 2017 Chardonnay in a glass. I think you have it. Okay. Let's do some sensory evaluation on this wine.
Actually, I'm going to enjoy this one. I'm not going to do a lot of analytical sensory, but I will talk about this one.
Well, so now you said we see things differently. I see this as red. Is that?
I hope not. If you do, we've got problems.
It wouldn't be the first time a professor has told me that. I'll let you go ahead, because I mean, you know, I've been taught, and I haven't probably tasted as many wines as you have, but owning a wine store and being in this industry for 15 years, we are more than average wine assessors. And we've learned a variety of methods, but nowhere near the sophistication of the methods that you bring forth. So I'd love, and I'm sure the audience would love as well, to kind of learn what you're thinking here.
Before I say that, yeah, my office has about 25 bottles of wine in it, and it's not a problem. My lab has about 1,000. So when I first smelled this wine, I got some very nice oak, followed by some lemon. I'm not sure I would call it Meyer lemon, but I definitely got the lemon part in the nose, and a little bit of flower. Yes.
When you say very nice oak, expand on that. What does very nice oak mean?
A problem that frequently crops up in Northern California Chardonnays is that people think some oak is great and a boatload of oak is even better.
Right.
And if I wanted to chew on oak, then I would chew on oak. This wine is more, this one is more restrained. That's why I'm calling it very nice oak. I mean, the oak is there, but it's not the thing.
No,
If you're
it's
paying $1,000 a barrel, you probably want to show it off. This one doesn't do that.
no, and Alyssa, I echo your sentiments with amen on that assessment, because if I want to walk around with a 2x4 in my mouth, I will. I don't
I
necessarily
won't, but
right, exactly. So that's what you mean. There's a perception of oak, there's a hint of oak, but it's not hitting you over the face.
it's not going insane. You know, I think my personal choice would be to go even lower than this, but that is a personal choice. That's not this is a very restrained California style oak level, and I like that. And then the other thing that really works with it is that the acid is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for the fact that it's got 14.5% alcohol, the acid is glorious. And that really helps make that oak even more integrated. So once I put it in the mouth, I get a little bit of butter. Again, not a huge amount, which is really nice because, again, California tends to go, oh, a little bit of butter is good. Let's make a butter bomb. This one is not that. And that lemonness comes back in a really, really nice wine. I like this wine.
Oh, good. I do too. It's funny because earlier today, I told Mission Control that I was so looking forward to this episode because of your attendance, but also because of this wine.
It's a very nice wine.
When we were sitting in Elaine's house earlier this month, as a matter of fact, and we were sitting out on her deck, looking out over her vineyard, and this is where this fruit comes from. And you could, first of all, they put on a food spread to die for, but that acidity was one of the first things I noticed. And I share your displeasure or for the oak butter bombs. It's like been there, done that. It's so overdone. But all of this fruit is estate fruit. So everything comes from Elaine's 3.5 acres, planted, I think, in the early 90s or mid 90s. But they're 14 miles from the Pacific. So they're very high elevation, oddly enough, 1,600 feet elevation, pretty steep hill.
Which is where the acidity comes from.
I was just going to ask, is that where the acidity comes from? Is it
Yeah, I think that's where the acidity comes from.
And it's also very cool. You know, so you can see some of the fog layer still burning off in the distance out here, but yeah, it's a pretty special place. And there's some great producers, Kistler being one, Peter Michael being one, some of the other ones that Hansel being another one that have a kiss of oak, if you will, but those bottles are also $75, $95, $100 a bottle.
Right.
This bottle of wine at $50 a bottle for this level of quality.
Yeah, it's lovely. No, it's very nice. And I'm very impressed. She's doing a very nice job. Somebody asked about how you can train your sense of smell. The same way you do anything else in the world, you pay attention. So I send my students out to go smell stuff and put names to smells. And the more you do that, the better you get. It's like riding a bike. Nobody who has a functional nose will not get better, but it's consciously making the decision. So one of the things I tell people is, if you live with somebody, have them go into the spice cabinet and hand you each spice without telling you what it is. Identify them. Once you can do all of the spice cabinets, then go outside and look at the flowers and smell the flowers and identify the flowers. Or if you smell something, stop and go, what is that? Where is that? Find it. Try to put a name to it. Can't put a name to it, and it's a plant, take a picture. Somebody will tell you what it is. The more you pay attention, the more you will get better at this. I have never had a judge for training or a student who did not get better if they wanted to. If they don't want to, you have to put in the work. I can't make you better. You can just make yourself better.
No, and you're 1,000% correct. When we used to own the retail wine store that we owned for 7 years, we had bottles open every day, and it's a frequency thing. It's a muscle memory thing. You have to practice. It's repetition. I love the spice rack idea where someone hands you something and you're smelling things. We also used to encourage people, and now they're starting to really become popular, is go to the farmer's market. You will smell so many different fresh items of produce, fresh herbs, fresh plants that are not available in the grocery store. So
now, one of the things I would say about the spice rack, and this is true for anything that you've never smelled before. So I'm going to put the glass up here. You don't ever start by smelling it when it's right under your nose, because you don't actually know what's in here and you don't know what it's going to do to your nose. Your receptors up here are actually pieces of your brain hanging out in space, which means that don't snort anything up your nose. It's not healthy. What you do is you start with it away from you and you waft it towards you. If by the time it's under your nose, you're still not smelling much, then you're probably not going to snort stuff up your nose. But especially with spices, they will go up. So you need to be fairly careful.
I like it very much so. I'm going to throw the last poll question up there, maybe. And so here we go. Which of these awards has the 2017 Elaine Chardonnay won? Wine of the Year in 2019 by Varietal Magazine, gold medal from San Francisco International Wine Competition 2019, gold medal from the San Francisco Chronicle International Wine Competition, could be the same competition in just 2 years from 2020, or all of the above. So one was 2019, one was 2020, one was Varietal Magazine, which sounds like a magazine I should have. And then I'm going to get to Jeff and Jane's favorite part of the episode. So we're going to give this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And all of you, this might be the first time you got it all correct, because it was a little bit of a freebie. So sadly, no one wins the $1,300 because I can't divide it equally among 16. You have to be present to win. And you have to mail in on a self-addressed stamped envelope your desire to have the money tax deducted. No idea. I'm sure it'll be fine. Yes, this wine has won quite a few awards. And keep in mind, as you've heard, Elaine hasn't been making wine that long. I think it's largely attributed to Hildegarde's class that her success is now a hockey stick because she has all of this knowledge, and she is an absolutely delightful person. But I need to get to Google Earth. So this is the part of the program where we go on a little bit of a field trip. I don't think we need the state borders because everyone recognizes the states. So let me show you first Elaine Wines, because as we were talking with Hildegarde, you can see just how close she is. I'll pull back a second so you can see how close she is to the ocean. She's 14 miles from the ocean, which is right over here, or the Pacific. You can see Santa Rosa right here, big city, Sonoma down here. You also see the Santa Rosa Airport right here, which is, I should get paid by the Santa Rosa Airport for the amount of endorsing I give this airport, because when you land in this airport, you are 4 to 7 minutes from a vineyard. When you land in SFO, you have a little bit of a drive to get up to wine country. But when we look at Elaine's topography, I said she's on top of a hill. If I spin this around and show you what we're looking at here, this hill, where's my ruler? Carry the one. Down to this road. Why is it doing that? Try this over here. Oh, I know why. Okay, so a quarter mile. In that quarter mile, down here, it's 146 feet. Up here, you're looking at 490 feet, 500 feet. So in a quarter mile, it goes up about 50 stories. That gives you an idea of how steep that hillside is. And when you factor in that she is 14 miles from the Pacific, You know that we've talked about it for a long time, the Petaluma Gap exposure, the air conditioning, the vacuum that comes off the Pacific, and the cloud cover that rolls in, or the fog layer that rolls in, is impressive. And then you have just this hillside, steep hillside on both sides. Here's the patio that I was talking about, where I took a picture of these vines out that way. But this is only 3.5 acres of land. So you can imagine she's not going to produce 500 cases of wine off of this property ever. She made just 45 cases of this Chardonnay. Now, the interesting thing too is this Chardonnay has about an 8 to 10 year lifespan on it. And so this is a 2017, so we're on year 6. I think it's tasting amazing. Hildegarde thought it was fantastic. And if you don't like acid and prefer oak and butter bombs, you will probably not like this, which is perfectly fine, by the way. If you can't be friends with us, but I'm just teasing, Hildegarde. You can still be friends, just pen pals. But if you want to really get into a great Chardonnay at $50 a bottle, this is pretty spectacular. Now, UC Davis is just a stone's throw away, just across the hillside. And Davis is where Hildegarde is. It's a little flatter, but again, surrounded by agricultural and plots and produce and vines all over the place. Depending upon the causeway, you're just outside of Sacramento. So I think it would be an interesting visit to come to UC Davis and walk the campus and say hello to some people, because most of the great wines we've had in our lives at Cellar Angels and our friends have been made by folks that have graduated, some of which Hildegarde's class, and mainly this institution. So it's a pretty special educational environment and location and worldwide recognition, largely thanks to the amount of charitable contributions and kindness of others in the industry that have given so much to continue this legacy. Pretty impressive. Hildegarde, thank you so much for the opportunity to learn. There's going to be, I'm sure, some folks that enroll in your class that say, I saw you on the Cellar Angel SIP program. I currently have no cumulative GPA at Davis, but could I get to your class?
Well, we'll see.
What was that thing you talked about, the provost? If there's a job or a class opening, I think, no. Before we go, I want to let folks know that there is a new Facebook group for Sipsters that was created this morning. If you want to join the Facebook group for Sipsters only, private group, the link Mission Control is just put into the chat. This is where you can share ideas. You can comment about this episode, other episodes that you've actually witnessed, enjoyed, post pictures of yourself drinking Cellar Angels wines. Again, wine is a community. We started this program 2.5 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, almost 3 years ago now, because we wanted a community, and it's gone stronger and continues to grow because wine is a beverage that brings people together, and I wouldn't have it any other way. So next week, we have the very, very shy, introverted person that we're just going to have to pull out of his shell, Nick Goldschmidt. I don't know if I'll ever be able to get him to speak. He's so shy and quiet. But this is, I think this is Nick's 3rd appearance on the program. And as you could tell from Hildegarde's reaction, it is buckle up is all I got to say, because you need to strap in for these episodes because they are hysterical. And last time, I think we caught up with Nick when he was in New Zealand for lockdown for COVID. So still one of my favorite Nick Goldschmidt quotes. When you drink a bad bottle of wine, it's like throwing a good one against the wall. So don't drink bad bottles of wine. We also have July announcement. July, we're having a massive donation drive for Save the Family Farms, which is the organization that we're helping in Napa. They are basically trying to rewrite ordinances so that the small micro wineries can actually have foot traffic. And as Hildegarde knows, UC Davis is an agricultural institution. These small family farmers are just that. They're farmers. They don't want to compete with the big boys. They have no interest in making 100,000 gallons of wine, but they would like to have maybe 10 people a week visit their facility. So this is a group that is trying to get, they were very successful in the last legislative process, took 3 years to get some of the ordinances written. They are now going to the next level, and Cellar Angels in the month of July is donating 10% of every single purchase off the Cellar Angels marketplace to help their cause and to donate it to Save the Family Farm. Be on the lookout. We're going to be announcing that. It's all about charity, giving, kindness, opening up a bottle of wine with people special. And Hildegarde, I hope to goodness we get to meet you someday in person, because
Well, come by. I'm here.
good. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your continued support. Hildegarde, thank you for surviving this episode and not falling asleep, because I know you're tired and have had a long
I was
week.
very tired, but I perked right up.
Good. Wishing you a fantastic holiday weekend, and everyone be good to one another, be kind, and open up a bottle of wine. Cheers all. Have a happy holiday.
Bye-bye.